This is the story about how a blind person saved the lives of 28 others from a building that was on fire and on the verge of collapse. The building was the World Trade Center. The date was 9/11. And the only reason he managed to save all those souls on that fateful day was because of Roselle, his Labrador retriever guide dog. This is their extraordinary story. She was asleep while the world was about to change in a way that none of us would ever quite fully recover from. She was asleep, curled under a desk on the 70th floor of the tallest building in New York City, dreaming maybe, ears twitching, and then a sound, a muffled boom. The building moved. This wasn't a tremble or some minor vibration. It physically moved 20 feet, according to the man whose desk she slept beneath. 20 feet, and then it swung back. She woke up. The man at the desk, the man who felt the tower lurch and smelled the smoke beginning to thread its way through the corridors, that man could not see. He had never seen, in fact, not once in his entire life. So in the seconds after the impact, when everyone around was screaming, when his colleague was pressed against the window shouting, "You don't understand, you can't see it," in those seconds, the most important information he had in the world was this. She had woken up, she had looked around, and she was wagging her tail. And he knew that she would save his life. Her name was Roselle. His was Michael Hingson. And what happened next, on one of the most terrible mornings any of us can remember, is amongst the most extraordinary stories I have ever shared. Welcome. I'm Arvind, Vijay, Mohan. And today we are about to discover all over again that the creatures who share our lives are more powerful than anything that we could ever possibly invent. And today's story is also about trust. The kind you build over 2 years of ordinary mornings, the coffee, the commute, the desk, so that when that extraordinary morning arrives, if it ever does, it's already there, already solid, already holding. This is the story of a blind man, his guide dog, and 1,463 steps down. Michael Hingson was born in 1950. He was born blind. Both optic nerves failed to develop properly. He had never had a single visual experience in his entire life. And I tell you this not as a qualifier, but because it matters for understanding what happened on September 11th and why he was, in a very specific and measurable way, more prepared for that morning than almost anyone else in that building. Hingson grew up in California. He got a physics degree from UC Irvine and built a career in tech sales, eventually becoming a regional sales manager for Quantum Corporation, a data storage company. By the autumn of 2001, he was based in New York, and his office was on the 70th floor of One World Trade Center, the North Tower. He commuted in from Westfield, New Jersey every day on the PATH train with his guide dog, Roselle. Roselle was a yellow Labrador retriever. She was born on March 12, 1998 at the Guide Dogs for the Blind facility in San Rafael, California, where she was trained to be exactly that, a guide to be matched with a partner. On November 22, 1999, Thanksgiving week, Roselle and Michael Hingson met for the first time. She was his 5th guide dog. He knew exactly how this worked. You don't choose a guide dog the way you would choose a pet. The organization matches you, your pace, your temperament, your life. And when the match is right, something happens that is genuinely difficult to describe in purely practical terms. The two of you become, in the truest sense, a single navigational unit. You're the mind, she's the eyes. Over the following 2 years, they traveled everywhere together. Trains, airports, conference rooms, restaurants. Roselle spent her working hours under Michael's desk. That was her spot, her signal that work had begun. And when work ended, harness off, she would become a dog again, playing with his other retired guide dog, a yellow lab named Linny, swimming, rolling in the grass. On the evening of September 10, 2001, the night before, Michael and his colleague David Frank had dinner in Manhattan. They were preparing for a seminar the next morning. Michael had ordered, apparently, what he regards as the best croissants in New York City for the breakfast spread. He remembers that detail. Croissants. He arrived at One World Trade Center early on September 11th. The conference room was already set up. He sat back down at his desk. Roselle settled underneath it, as always, and she went to sleep. 8:46 a.m. American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower at precisely that moment. It hit floors 93 to 99, just a mere 15 floors above Michael Hingson's desk. The building swayed. Smoke began to move through the corridors. And David Frank went to the window and saw something his mind simply could not process. And then there was fire, debris, and whatever had been above them that began to fall. Amidst all the commotion, Roselle had woken up. And though everyone was rushing about frantically, Roselle was calm. Here is something I think most of us have never really considered. When you're sighted and something goes terribly wrong, most of us have an immediate flood of visual information. Fire, smoke, people running, structural damage. That information is useful, sure, but it's also terrifying. It activates panic, and panic in an emergency can cost lives. Michael Hingson had none of that visual information. What he had instead was training, spatial memory, and most crucially, a calm dog. He would later recount, Roselle's behavior told me that we could evacuate in an entirely orderly way and that panicking wasn't really going to help anyone. Now that's not a small thing. That is actually the entire difference between what happened next and something far worse that could have happened. Hingson called his wife Karen. He told her that there had been an explosion of some sort and that they needed to evacuate the building. He was calm on that call. He made sure that his staff was moving. He and David Frank swept the office for anyone who might have possibly been left behind. And then the two of them, with Roselle, joined the stream of people heading for the stairwell. Stairwell B, 1,463 steps, 78 floors down. As soon as they entered the stairwell, Hingson made a note of something, a smell. He placed it almost immediately. He'd encountered it before, at airports. It was jet fuel. He didn't say anything. He just began to understand what had happened in a way that many people around him still hadn't. They descended methodically. Around them, burns victims were making their way down the stairs, people coughing through the smoke, the building making sounds that buildings aren't really supposed to make. And as they moved through the crowd on those stairs, people began to notice Roselle, a calm yellow Labrador in a harness, moving steadily, tail occasionally wagging. And then something unexpected happened, something that Hingson has described repeatedly since. People around them started to slow down from their panic into a more purposeful pace. They followed the dog, not consciously perhaps, but they followed her steadiness. By the time they reached around the 50th floor, their group had grown to approximately 30 people who were all moving together. And then David Frank stopped. He stopped on the stairs and said words to the effect that they were all going to die, that there was absolutely no way they could make it. Hingson's response was immediate, direct, and firm. Stop it, David. If Roselle and I can get down these stairs, so can you. That was enough to calm the frazzled nerves. Frank took a deep breath and continued moving. Somewhere in that descent, there was another moment that I find just as striking. A woman was struggling to breathe. She was convinced that she could not get out. She had stopped and she was asking everyone to just rush past her. And Hingson and about 8 others actually stopped with her. They had a group hug on that stairway of a burning building. Roselle stepped up and gave that lady's hand a little lick, and she joined that group that was making its way down. They then all together continued down that stairwell. Halfway through, they passed the firefighters who were going up. Roselle paused to greet them, a tail wag, a little nose touch. Some of the firefighters acknowledged her. The most were in a tearing rush. They had urgent matters to attend to. They ran past the group, past Roselle. Many of those men, heading in the direction that everyone else was fleeing from, did not come home. After just over an hour, Hingson, Frank, Roselle, and all the people around them reached the lobby of One World Trade Center. They were told not to exit onto the streets. Bodies were falling. Debris was falling. Officials were directing people away from the main doors. They found an alternate exit through the central complex and made their way out. And as they stepped onto the street, they heard it. The sound, Hingson said, was like a freight train crashing into a waterfall all at the same time. Tower 2, the South Tower, which had been struck second, was now collapsing. It was 9:59 a.m., just about an hour after the North Tower was hit. They ran. The debris cloud that followed the collapse of the South Tower was unlike anything anyone could have ever prepared for. The dust was not dust. It was pulverized concrete and glass and metal and paper and things that had once been people. Hingson said later that he could feel it going down through his throat and filling his lungs. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't hear his own voice over that roar. And then Roselle stopped. Completely still. Stop. Guide dogs are trained to stop when they encounter an unsafe condition. Michael reached out his hand to establish what was wrong. He felt a rail, metal, going downwards. It was stairs. It was a subway entrance. She had found a subway station in the middle of that blinding debris cloud while the world around her was ending, and she had stopped right at the top of the stairs so that Michael wouldn't slip and fall into that space. They descended. The air was cleaner below. Michael managed to catch his breath. And in that station, in the underground, they found a woman who could not see. She was not blind, but the falling debris had temporarily blinded her. She couldn't find her way out. And Michael Hingson, who'd been blind since birth, showed her the way. He led her through the station, guided by Roselle. They walked alongside her and they helped her out. 10 minutes after they emerged from that subway, One World Trade Center, the North Star, fell. Roselle then led Michael Hingson approximately 40 blocks through lower Manhattan to the apartment of a friend. They were now finally safe. That evening, when they finally arrived home in New Jersey, Michael removed Roselle's harness like every day. She grabbed her favorite toy. All she wanted to do now was play. Her workday was finally over. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of Michael Hingson and Roselle began to spread. He was featured on Larry King Live 5 times, Regis and Kelly, the CBS Morning Show. A nation that was searching for something, anything it could hold on to that wasn't pure grief, found something in that story. Roselle and Michael became that anchor for the nation, for the world really. Hingson left his career at Quantum Corporation. He joined Guide Dogs for the Blind, the same organization that had trained Roselle, as their public affairs director. He began speaking about disability, about trust, about Roselle and the role she had played. In 2004, she was diagnosed with immune-mediated conditions that were affecting her blood platelets. Medication managed it for 3 years. In March 2007, the medications began to damage her kidneys. Roselle retired from active guide work. Michael was assigned a new guide dog, but Roselle stayed. She lived with Michael and Karen. She was still his dog, just no longer his guide. On June 24, 2011, 10 years and 9 months after the towers fell, Michael noticed that something was wrong with Roselle. He took her to the vet. It was stomach ulcer. Roselle passed on June 26, 2011, at 8:52 at night. Michael and Karen were right by her side, holding her paw, with her, just like she had been for Michael on a day when he had needed her the most. She was 13 years old. In her memory, Michael Hingson and co-author Susie Flory wrote Thunderdog, the true story of a blind man, his guide dog, and the triumph of trust at Ground Zero. It debuted on the New York Times bestseller list in its very first week. Michael and Karen subsequently established Roselle's Dream Foundation, a charitable foundation to support blind people in living fuller lives. Michael Hingson still speaks, over 100 engagements every year. He still talks about Roselle, like every pet owner does, years, often decades after their loved one has been gone. But he also says something else. He says that he wasn't saved by Roselle. He was saved with her, that the two of them were a team, an inseparable team, and that trust, real trust, works in both directions. You know what's stayed with me most about this story? It's not the heroism. I mean, of course it is, obviously. 1,463 steps, an hour in a smoke-filled stairwell, leading a group of terrified strangers through a collapsing world with a kind of stillness that I genuinely cannot begin to fathom. But what I keep coming back to is much quieter than that. It's the moment on that very first morning, before the descent, before the subway station, before any of it unfolded. The moment when Michael Hingson felt that building move and heard his colleague telling him that the situation was catastrophic. And his entire read of the situation, his decision about how to proceed, rested on this. His dog had woken up and he knew that she was wagging her tail, calmly. He trusted her that completely. He trusted her that immediately. And it was that trust, not some extraordinary crisis management instinct, not some superhuman level of Zen calm. It was that trust that set the tone for everything that followed, for himself, for David Frank, for 30 other humans on that staircase. There's a woman somewhere who is standing in a subway station with debris in her eyes, unable to see, unable to find a way. And a blind man she had never met talked her through it, with his dog beside him. I wonder if she knows the name of the man who saved her life. I wonder if she's ever read the book he wrote dedicated to the hero who saved him and her. She was a dog. She was doing a job. She didn't know that she was being heroic. She just didn't panic. She just kept going. And that was Roselle.